This is the final session of our workshop. Originally, we had planned to have program directors from different organizations come and give an introduction here. Not everybody was available this afternoon, but we have Scott List from SRC who graciously agreed to give a short presentation. Afterwards, we're calling this session the open mic. So we are soliciting input from the audience. Could be anything, suggestions for the future, suggestions for collaboration. One idea that Guru and I have been discussing is what maybe we can have a volunteer from every group give a short summary of the discussions, so the systems, architecture, and the hardware. Just give a brief snapshot of what you have been talking about before. But so this is purely voluntary based and will be after Scott's talk.
Great, thank you, Patrick, for the introduction. Yeah, Patrick told me that he wanted some sort of wrap up of where we're going next, so I tried to put something together from the SRC perspective. Patrick said I'm director at SRC. Actually, it's quite interesting. I am the director of the T3S area, which is security, but I'm also director of packaging and automotive. And to first you think, what's the connection, right? But it's amazing. I mean, automotive has cybersecurity issues. Packaging has heterogeneous issues, heterogeneous integration issues. Security is permeating the entire semiconductor industry. It's amazing. I mean, it's in every place. But if you probably had a chance to digest that photograph, it looks very militaristic, sort of depressing. But I think it ties to our attacks, our needs for security in the cyberspace. The Maginot Line was basically constructed to keep France safe from Germany, and it didn't work because Patrick didn't build a wall through Belgium as well. But firewalls aren't successful unless they're perfect, and they're never perfect. Okay, you're getting through those. So anyway, that's the first part of the discussion, is the fabrics of security. I'll go through a few concepts of that. The reason I bring that up is that that's a major interest of folks at SRC. Our members are very interested in pushing that space, sort of a layered network of security. And the other thing that's coming up in the future from an SRC perspective is we're working, a lot of us are working on a roadmap for heterogeneous integration as it relates to security. So I'll share some thoughts with you in that space. Right, if this works, yeah, okay. So most of you are probably familiar with the fabric security. I'm not sure if you are, but I think the Maginot Line is a really good example of that. It's basically, attacks will happen. Protecting your periphery is not good enough. You're going to have something breaking into your system somewhere. And they're distributed, very difficult to detect or get rid of. There's a tremendous amount of data that's very exposed on systems that are not very secure, and there's no longer a serious space to work in. So basically, the bottom line of that is that you can't have these single security filters. You have to have a layered security products that can go across many vendor environments. Especially, this ties into systems, cloud, heterogeneous integration. I think it permeates the entire security infrastructure. So anyway, that's the basic definition. What can you do? They're going to be successful. What you can really do is detect the unauthorized access, isolate it, remove the funding process, and get the system back to a safe state. That's basically, it's almost like an internet. The generation of the internet versus a big server is that it's distributed, and you basically have to compartmentalize it and isolate the damage in the vendor and put things back in a safe state, minimizing damage. So anyway, that's a concept. But we are having a workshop. It's coming up in July. Basically, it's a half-a-day workshop. It's not as protracted as this one, but we definitely want to get some perspectives of what sort of research SRC is going to be funding in that space. So these are the coordinates for it. It's in California towards the end of July. It's by invitation only, so unfortunately you have to contact me to get invited. But if you're interested in that space, please feel free to contact me, and we'll try to get the agenda put together with more inputs on that. But that's definitely an area of growing interest for SRC, especially our members. The other topic I want to talk to you about was, this is an IEEE, I guess I could skip to the next slide too, but this is an IEEE heterogeneous integration roadmap. But for those of you, you're probably familiar with heterogeneous integration to some extent, but the passion guys are really working on it. This is probably the #1 priority right now. You're putting everything together in a very, very compact environment. It's basically stacking things vertically, putting things side by side, very divergent suppliers. You have 50 different chips from suppliers across the world, so it's basically a security nightmare. It's not something that people really like working with. So what's happened is that there's a heterogeneous integration roadmap, and a bunch of us, all these folks are from, well, I'm obviously the first person there, but other folks are from member companies, and they're participating, some guys from packaging, some guys from security, but our members are very interested in that space. And what we did is we put together this list. This is actually my final slide here, but we put together a list and chapter text for basically identifying those issues associated with heterogeneous integration. They have security threats, and then the blue are the topics that are actually other technical working groups. We're the technical working group for security, but we communicate to some of these other areas. And as you can see, there are many, I'm not going to go through all those details, but the basic concept is you put all these different components in close proximity to each other. You have many risks, like for example, to first order, you might think your electromagnetic signature is good because you're shielded by a lot of other chips above and below, right? But then you start getting the nightmarish concept that goes, well, what if there's an attacker chip right above you that has a detector loop that looks is 50 microns away from your chip and is seeing everything on your chip, and you can't stop it because it's hardwired that way. So there are a lot of nightmarish sort of situations you come across in there. And we're putting together this roadmap. It's going to be released in June. It's the ECTC conference is when it's going to be released to the public. But anyway, there's a lot of information in there that's I think a little disconcerting when it comes to security. The bottom, I think, was brought up quite a bit today. The co-design and simulation is probably one of the biggest long-range things that we have to make sure that all these pieces working together have various ways of mitigating all the threats and buffering all of the different exposures. That's probably the biggest theme of this chapter. But again, I think from many areas, the security issues are starting to permeate into real changes in the way people design and make products. So that's it. Any questions on that? You had a really good lunch. All right, if not, I think we're going to open mic section, I believe. Is that right? I haven't seen a question yet, so. Okay.
All right, let's
Proceed.
So we have now the open mic session. This is an open mic. Is there any of the area chairs who would be able to come and give a short summary of the discussion session? Systems? You two? I can give you the mic, or you can come up front and why don't you use this? I think that's fine. Yeah, okay, no, that's fine.
Sorry about that.
It's fixed.
So this morning we had a discussion on some attacks and defenses for the systems track. About 20 people have attended, and I think the summary will be, we had a couple of students who took all the detailed notes, and everything will be put together. What's that? That's all good? No, it's good? So will be put together in the report for you soon, okay? So we mostly decided to, since it was one session that was attacks and mitigation together, we decided to focus on mitigations mostly because we kind of talked about the attacks a lot during the, more talked about the attacks than the mitigations. And so probably about an hour and 15 minutes we spent on mitigations, and then at the end talked a little bit about the attacks. And these are the questions that we addressed. And a lot of interesting comments have been made. So we mostly focused on the first bullet, and I think the third bullet and the fourth, they're kind of combined here together. So the focus was on hardware and software co-design for security, and how can we design systems to be immune to attacks, to reduce the footprint for the attackers and so on. So one idea was that maybe one approach would be to fix current recent processors from Intel and kind of go backwards and take stuff away, disable speculative execution, remove caches. These are extreme measures, but that you can take smaller steps. And see what will it take to make them secure. Or maybe you can rethink the design from scratch. If you take the basic, von Neumann architecture, the sequential processor, using based on the stored program concept, right? And if you were to redesign it from scratch, what would it make it secure? What features would make it secure? Where you would add the features, but without compromising the security. Instead of taking something that has a lot of security holes and then trying to kind of fix it and patch it in a non-systematic way. So we had some interesting thoughts and ideas there. One thought that was brought, I think, by Chris is that a lot of the times it's not that simple. You can just, if you have a software model, for example, of a hardware processor, written up, and can you take bits and pieces away from this and make it secure, right? And will it make it secure? What happens in real systems is that you have all this. It's not like one single program gets executed, and you have the inputs and the execution and the output, but stuff gets intermixed, right? So you have the malicious code executing, and then legitimate code executing, and some malicious code, and all these instructions are kind of mixed up in the real world situation. And so it's not even, very trivial how to do that in those settings, but you could start reasoning about, security anyway by maybe, abstracting out of this. So then we talked about the need for abstractions and the new interfaces between the hardware and software, the secure interfaces. What is the capability that the hardware is going to provide? What are the features that the hardware is going to provide, and how can software use those capabilities to maybe inform the hardware of the security needs of applications? So for example, when you talk about the leakage and the quantification of the leakage here, we had discussions, of how much leakage is enough. One model is have zero leakage, and then you are truly secure. But what if you have 1 bit of leakage left, and what are the situations in which this could be still a security risk, and where it's okay to have a few bits here and there leaking? And that all depends on your threat model, depends on what you're protecting against, whether you're talking about images that they're trying to leak, or the key reconstruction, so things of that nature, right? So it has to be clearly defined. And then also we're talking about the need maybe for the applications and for the software to define, or to give some idea to the hardware about the security needs and security properties that you want to have, right? And then the system design, is built. Systems are built by trying to kind of adjust to what the application asks. And so again, you need interfaces for that, maybe ISA changes and things of that nature. So at the end, we talked a little bit about the open source hardware and software, and how those the presence of open source helps from security standpoint. So you'll see that in the discussions. And I think Or in terms of the metrics, I think it was also pointed out that the metrics and the question of metrics always comes up. It's not a new thing. 50 years ago, then people were talking about security. That was mentioned that we need metrics, and it's still pretty much the case now. So, but somehow the systematic progress wasn't made. There are bits and pieces out there, some publications, some papers that look promising, but somehow they're not used in a systematic way, and there is a big need for for that. And I think that theme is consistent across other areas. It's not just a systems area, but architecture and the hardware areas also mentioned the need for those things. And so at the end we talked a little bit, was really brief, 10-15 minutes about the attacks, right? And these are the questions that we posed to the for the discussions. And so we talked about attacks on the cloud and how to basically ensure the co-residency of the victim and the attacker and what it takes to do that, and also touched upon the defenses against that. GPUs and FPGAs pose obviously a new significant threat. New attacks are coming up, and we talked about them here. So and then of course the metrics have to be also they have to be applied to both attacks and defenses. And so I think that was the scope of our discussion. I may not have remembered all of the points. I mean, we had like an hour and a half of discussions. I think we may have been the last group to finish, and maybe other folks here would add to what I just said. Tim, Chris, others. I mean, please feel free to add to anything that I missed. So that's the kind of the rough summary of what we discussed. Anybody?
Next area. One down is architecture.
Okay. Instead of falling, you just go faster. Let me just plug in this thing. Oh, come on. Oh, yeah. It's better when you actually plug it in, correct? Oh.
Yeah.
Aha! Just slow. It's running on battery for too long, I guess. Okay, so this is from the architecture breakout session where we, I mean, as you will see, some of the topics will overlap with the previous one, but basically, one of our kind of items to discuss originally was like, can we identify all possible attacks in an architecture so that we can kind of systematically address them rather than kind of do the whack-a-mole approach. And the kind of consensus really was that probably won't be able to identify all of them because people will be able to come up with new ones. And we also envision like as soon as we are done with the kind of crypto keys and stuff like that, what's going to happen is there will be high level information that will be extracted from just kind of how much you are computing, for example. How long you stayed at your doctor's and stuff like that might be a side channel that leaks some privacy information. So essentially, it's very hard to protect all the information. But we can probably try to systematically understand the known ones and defend against them. So essentially, it was kind of mentioned like if an attack needs to identify a new side channel to succeed, that will be a huge success already, basically, because currently, there are known ones, and yet, they still work. Then on the metrics, this is kind of a recurring theme, obviously. For architecture, this is, especially important for those of you who are not architects. The textbook for architecture is Computer Architecture, a Quantitative Approach. So we're kind of trained that basically, if it's not quantifiable improvement, then we don't want it. And that means that basically to kind of take security of any sort seriously, it needs to be quantifiable because you're trading it off against quantifiable things. So essentially I lose like 10% performance for what? I mean, people know that they're losing 10% performance. They don't know what they're gaining, so it's going to be a very hard sell. So it's like, what would be the metrics? So basically the easy to define ones are like, kind of intuitively at least, would be like BPS. Okay, so BPS for bits per second leaked. Okay, so that's a pretty bad metric because not all bits are created equal. Essentially, you know, like leaking your key at you know 1 bit per minute is really bad. Leaking the contents of your hard drive 1 bit per minute, maybe you know, maybe you can live with that, right? But maybe it's useful as an upper bound. So basically, I mean, it has been mentioned that okay, but if I have something that is highly secure and it's like 1 bit per year, maybe I'll be happy with that. So essentially, it's a good metric for kind of extremely secure things. But when you come to things that are like leakier than you know, really secure, the problem is basically that it's kind of good enough for some things, not so good enough for other things. We can also use, and it's been discussed already, and probably people already know that, but it's like, you know, let's just throw it out there, the covert channel capacity essentially. So basically, I mean, one benefit of understanding covert channels created through architecture, et cetera, is that they kind of serve as an upper bound for what can be done through the side channel. So essentially, if I deliberately try to create side channel leakage from my program, that essentially can serve as an upper bound for what can accidentally happen. So pretty much, if you make something that is covert channel, you know, reasonably secure, then it's, you know, gonna be secure against accidental leakage as well. So although it's, again, you know, the bound may be very high, but at least, you know, for highly secure things, you can kind of estimate, you know, that bound and then say, okay, you know, the other one is much lower than that. I don't know how much, but even this one is pretty good, so I'm happy. And again, you know, we need to start somewhere basically, and we can try to improve this and try to define, you know, can we measure importance of certain bits and stuff like that, you know, in order to refine these bounds. But you know, without any numbers, it's going to be really, really hard to justify, you know, changes that cost you real power and real performance and so on. And then the hardware-software interface, basically, this was a very interesting discussion, actually. So it's like, okay, performance will be a disaster if it's, you know, constant time everything, no cache, no nothing. The idea was basically that, you know, okay, you know, some hardware primitives that are intended to be as secure as possible could be put on the processor. So, for example, there was a, okay, let's say you want a C move that is, you know, needed to implement crypto, and let's say that's all you have. So the idea will be, okay, you will keep your normal C move that you can architect to achieve as much performance as you can. Currently, let's say your C move is actually pretty secure, as in it's constant time, but you want to retain the freedom as a hardware manufacturer to, you know, change that later. How about having an SC move, which is the kind of constant time version of that will stay constant time even when you do that, and you maybe try to make it resilient against other side channels so that you can kind of focus on, okay, my crypto, if it uses this to manipulate keys, it's going to be as secure as I can make it as a hardware architect. And it's very hard to guarantee side channel security, but we can do something that is best effort, essentially. So basically, there is no liability for the manufacturer if the attack succeeds. But on the other hand, you're still, as a software designer, much better off than if you were on, like, we are not promising anything, and in fact, you don't even know whether it's going to leak because we designed it for performance, not for security. And then, you know, we were discussing also, like, what would be the kind of, you know, kind of another way would be like, you know, a side channel secure execution model. That would be very nice, but it's very hard to integrate that into the existing core because it's designed for performance, and somehow manipulating it to also be secure is hard because you will have to turn off all these things that it was designed to work well with, and you're kind of forcing it into the uncommon case that you know it's going to be poor. But maybe we can have like a side channel secure coprocessor. It's kind of like big little architecture, but now it will be secure. So essentially, if you want to be secure, maybe you run this on the kind of slower, much slower, but you know, but much more secure thing. That essentially the problem with that is it has been mentioned is that it's kind of like a fortress approach. You know, now the attackers know what to break because all of your secure stuff is going to be done on that. So if they figure out how to, so basically, it gives the attackers what to attack, but it also gives us a much smaller piece to defend. So the trade-off of this is unknown, but it's one of the things to explore, and that's it. Don't applaud me. It's my session colleagues that came up with all of this.
I have a question. How do you, so you mentioned metrics for side channels.
Yeah.
And we had the same discussion in the hardware group. But I'm wondering, so in hardware we can talk about physics, but you cannot. So how do you calibrate?
Well, I mean, for many of these side channels, so for example, for all the side channels that use cache, for example, you can only do so many cache measurements per second, right? Because fundamentally, you need a miss to happen in order to observe something, right? So essentially,
it's timing. It's all timing.
Yeah, well, I mean, basically for all the side channels you can define, especially the architecture one, you can define essentially what's the, event per second ratio that is observable, because I take time to measure the event. For the physical ones, you already know, I mean, there are information theoretic properties of like signal to noise ratios and stuff like that, bandwidth that can be used, et cetera, et cetera. These are all,
That needs to be calibrated.
Yeah. It does need to be calibrated, but it's, I mean, I'm not saying we can do this now. I'm saying that would be something to maybe try to actually achieve measurements, and people felt that we need at least to start somewhere, because if it's like it's not a perfect metric, so let's not use it. The problem again is that essentially without any metric, even a flawed one, nothing will happen.
Patrick, I want to follow up on the calibration aspect that you mentioned. To calibrate an attack, to calibrate the metric, do we need to do a successful attack first?
Sorry?
To calibrate the metric, do we need, you define a metric, right? But you need to calibrate your thing. But don't we need a successful attack before we can actually be confident of our calibration? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is this a question for the architect?
No, I mean, I think so. So, for example, in telecommunications, there was this derivation long ago by Shannon, kind of like this is the channel capacity, and it's a beautiful, very elegant thing that circumvents the problem of construction, right? It just says like this is what is theoretically achievable, and he actually managed to prove that it is achievable, like should be achievable. It's just a matter of you don't know how, and then people over the years kind of got closer to that, right? You also have these types of bounds that are basically, I know that you cannot achieve more than this. I don't know how. I mean, but there is a better bound. I just don't know what it is, right? And there is a benefit to it, because as soon as somebody proves there is a bound of any sort, somebody else will improve upon that bound, right? If you refuse to have a bound just because it's too high and it's ridiculous, so basically, we need to start the process of essentially doing that. So one way would be like okay, with caches, essentially, if you need to observe a miss, I know how many misses per second you can theoretically have. You probably will not be able to write software that does that. We can try how fast you can do in practical implementations, but you don't know what people might come up with that is maybe better than that. But if the bound is reasonably tight, as in, kind of this is what I show can be achieved with a covert channel, this is where I know you cannot do better than this with caches. If I get them reasonably close, then okay, so this is a good bound. If I cannot get them reasonably close, there is this iterative improvement process. So basically, if you try and cannot get to the bound, then it's either that there is something in the construction of the bound that you're not exploiting, or you have a bad bound. There is some fundamental limitation that you're not using in your bound. So basically the bound, so you have to always have this, you have to have the practical and the theoretical need to exist. You see the difference, you need to learn what's the wrong one, this one or this one, and improve it. And usually knowing how you derive the bound helps you improve this. Knowing how you did this and why you couldn't go up helps you improve the bound. So it's a very kind of elegant process, really. But to do that, you kind of have to work with somebody who understands how to prove things and stuff like that. And you need to work with somebody who actually knows how to do things practically. If we kind of stay on our own sides, we'll never do this, because we don't know what's possible or what should be possible. They don't know what's practical and what are the real limitations. So they work in this beautiful world of essentially things are possible and stuff like that. Then we work in the, I think it's good enough, but I have no idea if I'm maybe like a, 2 orders of magnitude off. So that's why it needs to start.
Okay.
Okay, so let's have the third group.
Oh, you don't need it?
So I got this assignment from Patrick and Guru about 10 minutes before the session starts. So I didn't really have the time to prepare any slides, and my colleague Yunsi, she is doing that. So I'll probably use the first 5 minutes, and then she's going to talk more. So we have the group talking about hardware, and I think, we had about at the At the minimum level, we have about 10, 12 people, and then at the peak, I count is about 15 people. People are going, in and out. And I think Patrick was there, Scott was there, and then we discussed a lot of items. So I'm going to mainly talking about the three things. So the first thing is about the other group also discussed about the matrix, and for us it is something more than matrix and the benchmark. And the second thing I'm going to talk about is develop hardware knobs, which is basically trying to enable the collaboration between different levels, giving you hardware knobs so people at architecture level, at software level, at system level can turn these knobs to trying to in some sense design software, design architecture to make your system more secure. And then the last thing I'm going to mention very, very briefly is about as the community, how we can support each other, how we can do this community service, community efforts. Okay, so the first one for the matrix, and that is something we discussed for a long time. And we talk about if you have the matrix, you have to say, okay, so if we don't do this, and first of all, it is definitely beyond the side channel and the cover channel. We talk about the security in general. So when we talk about this matrix, we're talking about if you don't have this matrix, if you don't have any countermeasures, any preventions, so what will be your loss? And you have to understand the attacker model. So from this point of view, you say, okay, so what do you lose? And then you try to, in some sense, to see how you can make your system better, who is going to pay for this, and then develop matrix. And we all realize this is a hard problem, and then some attendee mentioned it is not something, NSF could give us 500K to fix that. It has been something, other agencies has spent, probably a dozen years, or more than a dozen years. I think Dimitri also mentioned, in the past 15 years, people have been trying to do that, and it fails. And then for hardware security, DAPA has been trying to do that since the very beginning. And then we didn't have a lot of good things about hardware security matrix. So and then at the end, I think the group, we kind of agreed that, so instead of trying to shoot for something very high, we may try to start from doing something, more tangible, doing small things. If you can, isolate, for example, talking about cache, talking about the memory, talking about, for example, the scan chain, the JTAG, talking about power analysis. So talk about some small things. If we can do some matrix, do some modeling on these things, that can be a good thing to start with. And then in the entire society, we can work together. We can try to build on top of this. And people keep on mentioning about the NIST. For example, their random number generator, and then their randomness, test suite. And then that thing is not perfect, but people are using that. And then people are trying to keep adding things, make it better. And for benchmark, that is something related. So NIST has this, random number generation things. And then I believe, that is one thing Patrick mentioned here. So we're still using, EASTCAS 89 MCNC benchmarks. So can we design benchmarks for security or for side channel vulnerabilities? So that can benefit the society, not just, research society, but also industry and government, all these things. And the second thing we mentioned about it, this is, how hardware can help. Not just, to leak information, to leak through all these side channels, basically physically from device. And how can we make it things better? And for this, we also have a very, very heated debate. Because we talk about these things here, if that is, something I think Milos used an example yesterday, but this is something very similar. As a hardware designer, we design some products for some companies, and then they want these things to be, secure, and then they also want to test it. So we put everything there, and then eventually they say, oh, if you leave this thing here, for people, if you want to have energy, you can think about the JTAG. You have the scan chain, so you can doing all the debug stuff. And then they realize this becomes a severe security problem. And then they say, okay, can you disable it? So then they decided to, for example, to burn all the fuses, and it doesn't work. And then when you put this in the field, like Milos mentioned the other day, so you design everything with security, and then after some time, the customer realizes, oh, we have 20% performance down, but there is no attack, so why we need this? So get aware of that. And then after that attack comes, now you need debug. And then all the fuses has been burned. You can't debug anymore. So that is one of the problems. And then we talk about these things, and underlying the thing here is, if you think about testers, debuggers, people doing debug, that is something very similar to the hackers. They want to understand inside your device, inside your software, inside your system, inside your architecture. So if you disable everything, it is very hard for you to debug your system. But however, if you leave it open, then it is open to the bad guys. So that brings us to these things which we eventually call these hardware knobs. So you design, give some options, give some flexibilities, so people at higher level, they can tune these knobs. Basically based on their applications, how much security they need, how much site information if they leak, they don't really care, then they don't need to enable those things. And also this brings us to, we talk about economic side. So for hardware, you probably can basically price different things based on how much they turn the knob. And the final thing we talk about is community support. So the bottom line is we want people to support each other, not within just the hardware. We talk about hardware, architecture, system, application, software. So people will have to do these things vertically, holistically, trying to support each other, not just for security to defeat side channel, this analysis or this whatever covered channels, but also trying to support each other, provide, for example, higher level people can tell hardware people, so what kind of things we might need. And then we can tell people upstairs, so you see, okay, this is not a black box. We give you options. We give you some kind of information. So you can use this information, to make your system at higher level better. So I think I lost you. Are you ready? Okay. And at the end, we also talk about, this is a big effort, and we hope, not just NSF, Scott was here, we talk about HRC, we talk about industry. So if you can get support, researchers will be happy to take money to do whatever things is interesting or important to government and to the industry.
So GAN doesn't need any scripts. Everything is okay. So
says I don't have time to write scripts.
So firstly, I think because I can understand this workshop, I think the intention really try to bring all these areas, and especially architecture and system. So for hardware, we are a little bit different from the other two areas, but we have good discussion and we have good mix of people in the session. So we have quite a few industry participants that give us very good perspective, including Scott and Qualcomm and ADI people. So that's something I enjoy and learn. But I also have very good story to tell, to share, which is very lively, that everyone enjoys.
Noise.
Can it come up? It's okay, I think I have it.
There's that contact. You can continue.
It's okay. So everyone now has a fear. What will be next, right? So with this wake up by this vulnerability. So we are calling to definitely redesigning all the existing system and the hardware modules really with the very critical security in mind and then find the vulnerabilities. And we can, for example, like say at a low level, at a circuit level, and hardware level, there are many sensors out there. Designers have designed that without knowing why I need to design that, and then the user and the system at the top now need to look all of them together and say what would be the vulnerability. Like for example, thermal sensors have been there for other usage, but now this will be different again, side channel. And also not only the built-in sensors, but I think Edward mentioned this so-called drop-in sensors on FPGA. It can also be designed and used for side channel. Okay, so I also try to mostly stick to hardware level, and we'll talk a lot about fault injections, as I mentioned yesterday. That's another new type of side channel, and by comparison, why it hasn't received so much attention yet, because it's much more difficult to understand, to inject, to analyze, and Patrick shared a lot of his real, more like a hacking or fault injection practice, which is very difficult. We could understand the EM generation, propagation, interference, and therefore you can understand why it can be used as a fault injection tool, and therefore how to prevent, how to detect, how to protect that. There's a lot of fault injection one of the practitioners. And when we talk about fault, we also relate to reliability field, which has been there for 30 years, and a lot of experience, a lot of methods already out there. So how do we inherit or leverage, but yet still target very specifically for the side channel fault attack, rather than just a very, very random faults or random errors. Okay, so that's for the fourth thing. Okay, and the industry people brought up a lot about the gap between pre-silicon and post-silicon leakage. So we can probably have some idea, evaluate at a very early design stage in terms of intermediate variable in terms of leakage, but how do they translate really to the post-silicon? Why so the post-silicon, we have the real implementation, a lot of noise, a lot of other factors we didn't know that when we designed pre-silicon field. So how could we even kind of cross-validate or re-evaluate or recalibrate our leakage detection? I think this is a very interesting point and an important point. And that caused like something that Gao mentioned this morning. So in silicon, that's for hardware, but even for software, we have these multiple layers. From software goes through compiler and all the way down to hardware, and then what's the so-called cross security validation that makes sure really the hardware is really doing what the software high level asks the hardware to do. Okay, so all these different cross-layer security validation would be very important. So finally, Scott is there and from SRC and also partly probably represent the action with the NSF. So it's really calling for, I think the outcome, hopefully, of this workshop is that we have all this collective wisdom inputs from the community, and we want to channel, reflect this, send this back to NSF, the founding agencies. So I think Scott, that's what he shares with us, that down the road, definitely the NSF wants for the long term, like maybe 10 years down the road, is really a big move for design for security, and specifically here will be designed for side channel and cover channel security. And there are a lot of things so for components and also very importantly for integration, because we feel that the side channel is really some interaction between components. So if you just guarantee some local security of the components and then you lose out the big picture, and then still you have many side channel crossing them, and then so integration is very important, and there will be design methods, there will be design tools, involve CAD companies, and someone also brought up formal methods as a good method for design for security, because at many layers you can specify the security, extract the properties, and then kind of walk through that how these are implemented, guaranteed, and then verified. I think that's a very interesting point to kind of a direction to go to weave these scientific methods into real design for security. So finally, industry brought up this certification. And we have NIST, we have common criterion specifically for hardware security and side channel security, but there's still a huge open space outside what this current standardization organization have covered. For example, like Ro brought up this random number generator. So random number generator is just testing the randomness, okay, maybe about 20 statistic metrics to measure the random bits. But again, the implementation, when you implement a random number generator in hardware, in processor, for example, there may be timing channel, because if you generate 1 bit longer than 0 bit or something, there's actually some security implication. So this is also interesting that I think academia probably can help and look into this, again, open space outside what has been covered by these organizations. And I think also we need some channel to feedback this to industry and push for, as a community, push for standardization, push for even better and more rigorous certification. I think that's all I have. I may have left out some other important points too.
So I think it's important that we write a good report here, and we pass it not just to NSF, but also to DARPA, DOE, okay, and Air Force and other places. But I would suggest DARPA is very important, NSC, of course.
Thank you. I think we'll follow up. Once again, before I open up for discussions, I'd like to thank a very special person here, Mark Agelpay. He's been kindly recording all the video and made it possible for some of you to watch it online. You know, and he's been like recording the whole thing for us to view later. So let's give him a round of applause. And there's another person who is not here, Robert Baden, who is also like worked behind the scenes quite a bit to make this workshop happen. So I'd like to thank these two people. And I know Mark has to run somewhere quickly, so thank you, Mark.
Will the slides be posted online?
So yes, we are planning on getting everything online. So we'll be sending out a bunch of emails to all of you speakers and all of you participants to chime in your thoughts. So that will definitely happen.
I just wanted to add one more thing to our report that is a little bit different from everything else that we talked about, and that's the impact on the education. So at the end of our session, the breakout session, we discussed how can we, improve educational component, and one idea was maybe create, or even research component too, but how to create, say, a competition for system security and computer architecture security to enable people to kind of, come up with designs under some common framework, for example, at a conference or at a workshop. Right now, the motivational example was computer architecture community has this branch prediction championship competitions, for example, prefetching competitions, value prediction competitions, and that's been going on for several years, and that really pushed the state of the art, according to people working in those areas, in those respective domains. So why can't we do something like that for security? Software security has, this capture the flag type competitions. So if we do something like this for hardware systems, architecture, security, one idea that came up was to do a covert channel competition. Who can create the fastest covert channel, for example, as a workshop with some conference, okay? And then the next step would be to change a little bit of code and mitigate that channel, and then break that mitigation and so on and so forth, right? You can even push it up. But those kinds of activities people felt would be very good to have. I just wanted to add that to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri. So now it's open mic, so feel free to chime in any thoughts that you think would help improve this community.